Hello again. So I'm going to answer another parent's question today that I think might be useful for everyone to have clarified. The question had to do with how the bow goes across the string, and at what point it makes contact, and does it play all four strings, etc. And so there's a few different things that go into this, and I'm doing this with the violin in my hand. I'll try to show you as if it's also a cello, because the same rules kind of apply. The first thing is, and I've mentioned this a couple times in other videos, that we want to have it go across the violin as straight as possible. Just if I can make that as straight as possible, or the best possible. There we go. Ah, that's beautiful. Okay, like at a nice right angle. Okay, now I want you to also notice, and of course I'm not in playing position right now, but it's about halfway in between the bridge and the end of the fingerboard, this little space in here. And that's why we have these cutouts, by the way, is so that our bow can go across the string, especially with the upper and lower strings, without hitting them. Now, that's ideally the sort of the lane we want to keep it in, and that's why there's that really good rosining warm-up that I give you. I'm not sure what the name of it is at present, but like preparing the bow or something like that. That helps you practice doing that as straight as possible. And as you're bowing across in front of you, in this case, in that case with rosin, in this case, actually on the string, helps you practice keeping it straight. Now, in terms of where it makes contact, as far as what string it goes, now I want you to think about there being four different angles. Let me just see if I can bring this down a little bit so you can see my arm. And it's like four different. Well, parents will understand this better probably than the kids will. The analogy for a parent might be like a car gear, like as if it's like stick shift kind of thing. Kids might understand it better as if it's being shifters on a bike if they're driving, or if they're riding a bike that happens to have them, or have an older sibling or family member that has gear shifters. So we basically have four different positions. If we're on our highest string, let's say E string for violin, A string for viola, our elbow is, let me bring this down a bit more. Our elbow is pretty much right against our body. Right? So if I have this up and I'm playing on the E string, it's really just hanging down. And that way when I move my arm up and down, again, notice that this part of my arm is not moving. Right? It's mostly in my forearm, and I bend at the wrist also. And that keeps me on that string and as straight as possible. When I go to my A string, I lift it up just a little bit. But again, I'm still bending at that same spot. I'm not bowing like this, and I'm certainly not bowing like this. This is for changing strings. When I go to, and that if I were on viola, that would be where my D string is, right? Just a little bit away from your body. When I go to the next string over, violin's a D string, viola would be a G string, then I raise it up just a little bit more. Now it's just a little bit below my shoulder level. And then finally for the G string, I don't lift up my elbow quite so much. I more like lift up my wrist. And the reason is because it gets really tiring to have your arm that far up. Also, a little less socially acceptable to have your elbow way up there in the sky. But it mostly has to do with, making sure that your arm's not going to get too tired. When I look at it from this point of view, I can see that there's, my bow is at a certain angle, right? And the angle mirrors whatever it is that my upper arm does. So it's almost, well, it's not quite pointing straight up. It's, let's see, I would estimate that at maybe 75 degrees. Don't get a protractor. It's not worth that precision. But it's almost like it's pointing straight up. You could almost think about it like that. The A string pointing maybe at a 45-degree angle. D string, and again, I'm talking about violin strings. D string is when it's almost going straight across. And then G string, I have to actually kind of point it down to get that. There are times later on when we do want two strings, and it, we train ourselves to be only on one for a long time, and then suddenly we have to do two together. But the first skill to get is to get one single string and keep it on that same angle as you move your arm. So again, this is why we don't move this part of the arm, because that sort of becomes part of that angle. And no matter what string I'm on, I'm bending my arm. It's a hinge, right? Your elbow is a hinge. I'm just bending it, just opening and closing it, opening and closing it. So if I've set up everything correctly, and I open and close it, open and close it, open and close it, it should keep me on that string. If I'm lifting my elbow when I play and dropping it, I will roll to a different string. Right? And sometimes that's what we want. Sometimes we do need to get to another string. Most of the time, however, we keep it on that same string, then we change it to the other, and then change it to the other, so that when we do change strings, it becomes a very deliberate, very on-purpose action, right? So that we're not just, kind of moving in this way. No, it's like, I want to go from this string to that string, and you're making a very obvious decision to do that, and not just, it happened to roll over there. Okay, so trying to keep it on that one string and then changing it is a better way to go as far as technique goes. Now, the last part of where does the bow go has to be with at what point in the bow do we make contact on the string. And the reality is, actually, we use the whole thing, right? But we don't always use the whole thing every single time. That would be very tiring. So the best place to keep it in the beginning is pretty much right in the middle, right? Where it is the closest to the hair. And when you do that, you've basically created a box with my arm, right? Arm, the bow going up and then coming back along the violin. It's almost a square. So that's a way of kind of telling that if everything is lining up where you want it to be. And then, you'll move it a little bit up and down from there. I do want to encourage students to use, a good size amount of bow. They should be able to use about, because this is a full-size bow, but they should be able to use maybe at least 4 or 5 inches of bow in their bow stroke. The more that they can use, the better, because the more sound they'll get, and it's also good practice for getting a nice, good bow stroke action. Okay, so placing it in the middle is a good place to start. Some people find it more comfortable to place it closer to the frog. Some people find it a little closer. And this is much rarer, find it easier to place it closer to the tip. But the middle is usually the most comfortable. Now, if I'm playing a cello, it's the same idea, but instead of, I still need it to be straight, right, straight across the strings. Granted, this would be much further down on me if I had an actual cello. And I still am trying to keep it in that lane in between the fingerboard and the bridge. But this case, my angle is something I'm looking down at. So I'm bowing on my A string, my D string, my G string, and my C string, and it's not the right size for me. If it's a cello, this would be a very tiny cello. But again, where your elbow is, sort of reaching around the instrument rather than up and down, is what's going to keep you on that same string. Okay, so it's all about placing your arm in the right spot, and then just bending at the elbow and the wrist to make it move as straight as possible. Okay, whether it's violin moving up and down, or cello, kind of, if I want my A string, I got to reach around. If I want my C string, I have to kind of reach back a little bit, or things in between. Okay, so it's kind of like you're kind of reaching around for somebody. Give them a hug or something like that, which is always a good practice anyway. All right, so I hope that helps, and please feel free to send me more questions. I have no problem answering. If I think it makes a good video, I'm happy to answer it for everybody. All right, take care.